There are places in this world that aren't meant to be discovered, places that hide dark secrets behind their natural beauty. When I first heard about the Shadow Forest in New Hampshire, I couldn't resist my curiosity. They said those who enter rarely return, and if they do, they come back as different people. I thought it was all just myths, until I stood at its entrance, where everything began to shift from legend to a nightmare I wasn't prepared for. I've always loved exploring new places, especially the ones people are too scared to visit. It was part of who I am, or maybe a family curse that left me with an insatiable curiosity. 2 months ago, I arrived in a small town in New Hampshire. It was a quiet town, barely any movement, surrounded by a dense forest known as the Shadow Forest. The townsfolk spoke of the forest with a kind of fear. Some said it was cursed, others spoke of people who entered and never came back. To me, it was an opportunity one couldn't pass up. I wanted to uncover the truth, whether the forest was really haunted or just the subject of old legends passed down through the years. I arrived in town in a rented car, driving along narrow roads surrounded by dense trees. As I entered the town, it felt like time had stopped there since the 1960s. The old wooden houses, dirt roads, and the curious stares from the locals made me feel like an outsider. I rented a small room at an inn run by an old man named Tom. When I told him about my plans to explore the forest, his expression changed suddenly, like he wanted to warn me but hesitated. All he said was, "The forest isn't a place to mess around with. You'll find what you're looking for, but be careful, not everything you see there is real." That night, I couldn't sleep. Tom's words kept running through my mind, along with thoughts about the forest and what made people fear it so much. I decided to start my exploration at dawn. I packed a small bag with a flashlight, a map, and a compass, and set out with the first light of morning. As I entered the forest, I felt an unnatural silence. There were no birds singing, not even the sound of leaves rustling in the wind. The air was heavy, as if the forest was hiding something it didn't want me to discover. After 2 hours of walking, I started noticing strange things. The trees all looked eerily similar, as if I was walking in circles. I decided to take a break and check the map, but when I pulled it out, the writing had faded in a way I couldn't explain. As I was trying to find a way out, I saw a small, abandoned cabin hidden among the trees. It looked incredibly old, with wooden walls covered in thick layers of moss. I felt an odd pull toward the cabin, like something inside was calling me to come in. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere grew even stranger. There was an old table with a leather-bound notebook on it. I opened the notebook and found messages written in messy handwriting. The entries talked about people who had entered the forest and couldn't find their way out. One of the messages read, "If you found this notebook, you're already in danger. The forest isn't what it seems. Don't trust the shadows, don't trust yourself." After reading the messages, I felt an overwhelming urge to leave the cabin. But as soon as I stepped outside, I noticed the atmosphere had grown darker, even though the sun hadn't set yet. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The shadows started to appear gradually between the trees. They looked like human shapes, but they weren't real. I couldn't make out any features, but they were slowly moving toward me. For the first time, I felt real fear. I tried to run, but no matter how far I went, I kept ending up in the same spot. The shadows were getting closer, and I started hearing strange whispers, like they were trying to say something I couldn't understand. As the shadows drew closer, I felt my body freeze. The distorted whispers grew louder, like someone was speaking directly into my ear, but the words were vague and incomprehensible. I tried to steady myself, grabbed my flashlight, and shone it on one of the shadows. It vanished instantly, as if it was never there. But the rest didn't disappear. Instead, they started moving faster. I felt trapped. I tried to run, but the forest seemed to shift around me. The trees grew closer together, almost like they were closing in, blocking my path and stopping me from escaping. I kept running until I reached a slightly open area. There, I found a small lake. Its surface reflected the light in a strange way, almost like a mirror. As I stared into it, I saw my face, but it wasn't the way I knew it. When I saw my reflection on the lake's surface, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My reflection wasn't normal, my eyes were completely black, and my face looked pale, like I was dead. A chill ran through my body, and I quickly stepped away from the lake. But what was even stranger was that I heard a voice behind me. "Don't be afraid. This is just the beginning." I turned quickly and saw an old man standing under a tree. He was wearing a torn brown coat, and his face was marked with deep scars. But there was an eerie calmness about him. I asked, "Who are you? And how did you get here?" He replied in a low voice, "I was like you, too curious for my own good. But I made a mistake. I trusted what I saw." The old man took slow steps toward me and began telling his story. He said he had entered the forest 20 years ago and had never been able to leave. The forest played tricks on his mind, showing him things he couldn't explain. He warned me that the shadows were only the beginning and that the forest was testing me. "What do they want?" I asked, fear creeping into my voice. "They're not spirits or creatures," he said. "It's the forest itself. It consumes anyone bold enough to enter. It will toy with your mind until you lose yourself. And then, you'll be here forever." I asked him, "Who are you? And how did you get here?" He answered in a quiet voice, "I was like you, too curious for my own good. But I made a mistake. I trusted what I saw." The old man stepped closer, his movements slow and deliberate, and began to share his story. He said he had entered the forest 20 years ago and had never been able to leave. The forest, he explained, played with his mind, showing him things he couldn't understand. He warned me that the shadows were just the beginning and that the forest was testing me. "What do they want?" I asked, fear gripping me. "They're not spirits or creatures," he said. "It's the forest itself. It devours anyone brave, or foolish, enough to enter. It will twist your mind until you lose yourself. And then, you'll be trapped here forever." I tried to make sense of his words, but he added, "If you want to survive, you have to resist what you see. Don't trust anything you hear or witness. The forest knows your fears and will use them against you." Before I could ask him anything else, the old man suddenly disappeared, as if he had evaporated into thin air. I couldn't explain what had just happened, but the heavy silence that followed reminded me I was alone again. I kept walking, desperately trying to find a way out. But the shadows didn't disappear, they became clearer, more defined. Then, I started hearing familiar voices, voices of my loved ones. I heard my mother calling my name, her tone warm yet distant. Then, I heard the voice of my friend, the one I lost years ago, pleading for help. His voice was filled with pain, and it sent chills down my spine. For a moment, I froze. The forest was no longer just playing tricks on my eyes, it was reaching into my memories, pulling out the people I cared about most. I knew it was a trick, but the voices were so real. I tried to ignore them, but in a moment of weakness, I turned toward one of the shadows. I saw my mother's face. She was smiling at me and said, "Come, my son. I'm here to take you home." Tears streamed down my face. She looked so real, so familiar, that I almost believed her. But then I remembered the old man's words and forced myself to step back. My heart ached, but deep down, I knew it wasn't her. It was the forest, preying on my emotions, trying to break me. After hours of walking in the darkness, I stumbled upon another cabin. This one was different from the first. It looked like it was still inhabited. Dim lights leaked through the windows, and I could hear faint rustling noises coming from inside. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I should approach. The eerie silence of the forest made the sounds from the cabin even more unsettling. But I was exhausted, and curiosity, along with desperation, got the better of me. Slowly, I made my way to the door. I hesitated at the door but felt like I had no other option. Slowly, I pushed it open and saw a woman sitting on a wooden chair. She wore an old, tattered dress, and her long white hair covered most of her face. "Finally, you've arrived," she said in a faint voice, as though she had been expecting me. I asked, "Who are you? And how do you know me?" She smiled strangely, her expression unsettling, and said, "I've been waiting for you. The forest doesn't choose randomly. You're here for a reason." I tried to understand what she meant, but before I could say anything, she continued, "If you want to survive, you must face the truth. The forest will take you into your darkest depths and show you what you fear more than anything else." As I left the cabin, the forest felt even darker, heavier. The trees seemed to be watching me, their presence oppressive, and the sounds around me grew sharper and more unsettling. But then I noticed something strange. I began to see fragments of my childhood. I saw my old house, my favorite toy, and even the tree I used to climb as a kid. But everything was twisted in a horrifying way. The house was broken and crumbling, the toy was covered in blood, and the tree was filled with the sounds of children screaming. That's when it hit me, the forest was trying to break me, using my memories against me. I realized that if I gave in to what I was seeing, I would never find my way out. As night fell, the shadows closed in on me even more. I felt completely trapped. I tried using my flashlight, but the battery suddenly died, leaving me in complete darkness. All I had was my fear and my will to survive. Then, I heard a new voice, a deep, resonant one that sent shivers down my spine. It said, "You're so close. But leaving won't be easy." As I braced myself for whatever was coming, I suddenly felt a hand touch my shoulder. I turned around quickly, my heart pounding, but all I saw was darkness.